out on the balcony out front of the building and look down Broad Street, the view's amazing. I think it's one of the better views of Broad Street that you can have is from the top of this place. So let's get started with the pledge. We'll do the pledge and then go into the chair update. You all please stand. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets would glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
How are we all doing today? Good. Well, today's opening remarks and chair update are a little bit melancholy for me. We talked a little bit during executive committee meeting this morning, but this will be Doug Howard's last meeting as a CAB member and as our vice chair. Doug's stepping away, and I'm going to ask Doug to talk to us for a little bit, but I'm kind of broke up.
Well, can you hear me? As I told Gil and during our executive meeting, and we've talked about to do some work for the Lord, prison ministry called Kairos. If any of you may be interested in the future, just let me know, but I'm stepping down to do some work in that. But I'm leaving with a lot of mixed reservations in the fact that I really enjoyed the CAB, everyone that is here. James, you've been outstanding in what you do, and your team, Heather, Delisa, Amy, all of you all have made a big impression on me, leaving me with the fact that I know that we're in good hands right here. Gil is doing an outstanding job as chair, and I'm leaving with the thoughts that, you guys are doing what needs to be done, and I just ask that you continue to do so. But as I told everyone earlier this morning, I live at So if you ever drive by there, you want a cup of coffee, tea, or just talk, you can stop in and see me. But I have really enjoyed this ride. It's not as long as I thought it would be, but I've really enjoyed being here. So thanks a lot, and God bless you all. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug. You just invited the world, right?
That's all right.
YouTube's like watching us. All kidding aside, I've learned so much from Doug about military and I'm an honorary sergeant major now.
You are.
Yeah, he made me an honorary sergeant major, and I've had the pleasure of traveling with Doug for 2 years to all chair meetings, environmental management, site-specific advisory board meetings, and just the way Doug conducts himself is exactly what you think he would be like. He is a gentleman of the first class order. He has such a great tactful way to, I know you may find this hard to believe, but rein me in when needed. And I will miss him very much. And so Doug, thank you so much for everything that you've done, not just for the CAB, but for me personally. Thank you. I'll miss you. Moving on to what we've been doing since the last meeting. Doug and myself, along with Amy, Mike Budney, and James, had the privilege of traveling to Idaho. I keep getting confused between if I was in Idaho or Utah. I flew into Utah. We all flew into Utah, but I've been messing it up. We went to Idaho National Lab, and we got to view their site, witness their site, and also find out why I don't live in Idaho. It's cold. Human beings aren't meant to live there, but they seem to. But no, we enjoyed ourselves. We learned quite a bit. For those of us around the table who have been a while and you understand when I say whippable, that's kind of a term I've come up with. I don't know if it's something I've picked up from other people, but we always talk about some waste at Savannah River site that could go to WIP in New Mexico. Well, once, for me personally, I got to Idaho, I saw, oh, well, they have a lot of whippable stuff. And I understand why we see such numbers of shipments going from Idaho to WIP compared to the rest of the complex. And when I say the complex, I mean the entire environmental management complex of DOE. As I shared with the executive committee this morning, I don't know if y'all have had this happen to you yet. I don't know if it was just me. I don't know if you're going to experience it. I'm speaking to CAB members, to where it just clicks. There's going to be a meeting where, I'm still waiting for my meeting to click, but where we hear these briefings, we hear these presentations, and we start to understand, okay, it's starting to click together. I'm starting to understand. I'm starting to get, I'm in my 5th year, and I'm starting to understand this. Going to 2 years of these all-chair meetings, it clicked for me this last meeting. We've listened to, and we've heard it from Dave Borak, our designated federal officer, about one complex, one environmental management department. Well, it's always been confusing to me that we're one EM with 8 different sites. And in my opinion, in going to these meetings, it's always been each site competing for their own site. So whether it be Hanford or Savannah River or Oak Ridge or Los Alamos or New Mexico or Nevada, whatever it happens to be, everyone has their interests, and I get it. So the discussion came up about a deep geological repository. We've had that conversation around this table before. Nevada doesn't like to use the word Yucca Mountain. Their contention at the board doesn't like to talk about it. But we talked about it a little bit. Where is this stuff gonna go? And then there was a lot of discussion. I asked the question, there's liquid waste problems in South Carolina. There are clear liquid waste problems in Washington. Savannah River site has been vitrifying glass logs for decades. Washington's been trying to vitrify glass canisters for decades and hasn't got their program up and running. It was explained to me very clearly by DOE at Washington, well, what's going on is Savannah River site has got DWPF up and running. That's what does our vitrification. And now we're getting SWPF up and running, and knock on wood, it'll be up and running here in a few months for liquid waste and providing the fuel, providing so we can vitrify. Hanford, Washington's been trying to get both of their facilities up and running for the past 30 years. So in the spirit of oneness and hearing all this talk about environmental management and us being all on the same team and one and not competing with each other, I asked the question, foolish me, well, how come the East Coast can get it done, but the West Coast can't? And I said that very specifically because I don't want it to be about Savannah River or I want it to be about Hanford. But why can one complex get something done well on the East Coast, but can't even get it started on the West Coast? And what was explained to us, and those of you that know me well know that I do let my emotions be seen sometimes. My head almost exploded. We were told by a high-ranking member of environmental management in Washington, well, the West Coast and the East Coast operate two different philosophies. And that really bothered me. I understand that the West Coast waste is different, and it's not quite apples to apples. It is an apples to oranges conversation. But one complex can get something done so well on one side of the country, but can't even get started on the other. And we can sit back and we can talk about all the reasons why that is. But I think the whole reason we're here as a Citizens Advisory Board at Savannah River and at other sites, and the reason we come together is so we can provide recommendations. Not necessarily on the aspects of what contractors should do differently or what the science should be, but it seems to me that there's been a failure in leadership for 30, 40 years here. And I think that's why we're a board, is that we can sit back and point out and say, hey, you're working two different philosophies, one side's working, one's not. It's time to fix this. So, as we go on about our day today and we hear things, we're very much focused on Savannah River site. That's our mission. That's what we're called to do. But we are a bigger collective of an entire organization. And we do want to see we want to see this place cleaned up. And when I say this place, I mean South Carolina. I mean everything that affects Savannah River. But we also want to see our country cleaned up. And we have a strong presence here to do so. So as we go forward, realize we have a very strong message to deliver to DOE, Department of Energy. The people that we deal with at the Department of Energy empower us to give that information back to them. They want to hear what our thoughts are. So as we move forward, I hope we have a great meeting. I know we will. We have very good presentations. I know we have a lot to talk about in way of recommendations. We're going to miss Doug, but Doug's not the only one that's leaving us. We're also going to say goodbye to Eleanor, and she won't even look up, but now she just did. And so we will talk a little bit more with Eleanor as the meeting progresses. And I'm sorry, there's brightness coming in. Brian, he'll be here tomorrow. Brian's also going to step back too, but I couldn't see. So with that being said, I do want to go out on a light note. James, I live in beautiful Aiken, South Carolina, and I don't think I've heard anyone ever say there's an amazing view of Augusta unless they're at a golf course. We had the pleasure of hosting, Doug and I had the pleasure of hosting the all chairs meeting here when? In early May. And so James was telling everyone, oh, it's such a great view. The only thing people wanted to know where's the Masters? And we said, look that way. Thank you all. Let's have a great meeting.
Just a few things we want to run through before we get started for the day. I'm not going to read all of our rules. We're at the last meeting of the year by now. If you don't know them, then we've done everything wrong.
Oh, James, can I interrupt you?
Sure.
My bad. You may see a change to the agenda. Amy's here as our designated deputy federal officer, and I want to welcome her here as a first time, as officially as a DDFO. So thank you. Thank you. But we have moved the election of board officers and chair to the end of today. The reason we've moved that is because Amy is here and she is our DDFO. She is she along with Mike Michelanis is our DDFOs. She will not be able to be in attendance tomorrow, and Michael's at a meeting that Amy's going to be flying to tonight. So Thomas will be our DDFO tomorrow. He's been appointed by David Borak in Washington, the DFO, to be our DDFO for the day. But since we're having a little bit of a switch and get all this confusion, I asked James if we could just do the elections today while we're in our normal situation with Amy here. So I wanted to explain that.
And I
Thanks.
have the agenda open, so why not?
Okay.
A few things that I want to make sure that we do today. One, please state your name before making comments or asking questions. It helps us when we're doing the minutes. I know that every now and again I'll hear Heather mumble, like, who said that? And it's because they didn't introduce themselves. Keep her from muttering at me, and please make sure that you introduce yourselves. Another thing, please do not dominate conversations. We've been doing a great job of it this past year. Everybody getting a chance to get their voices heard and share your thoughts, experiences, and questions with the rest of the board. I really appreciate it. In that same vein, please make sure that you speak directly into the microphones. And I do not mean near it, at it. I mean, you need to put it in front of you, and you need to speak directly in front of it. If your head moves, the microphone needs to move too. Not like this, directly into it, please. That way everybody can hear you loud and clear, and they don't have to turn up the soundboard and make that feedback noise that we all really hate. As long as everyone speaks directly into the microphones, and I'm sounding like I'm beating a dead horse, but if we do that, then we will not have any problems this meeting, okay? As we run through the agenda, we do have quite a bit to handle today. We do have our agency updates. We'll get the committee updates from everyone. We'll have an election. We'll take a break while those votes are counted. And then we'll come back and we'll do our draft recommendation discussion. I know that there is a lot of questions about some of these, so I'm really excited to get into it. You'll see two of them Gil and Doug brought back. They are the EMSSAB recommendations, the last two bullets there. I'm going to say this again. Gil's probably going to say it when he introduces them. But if you'll recall from the last time we dealt with these things, we do not wordsmith them. We do not change them. We can discuss them all day long. But at the end of the day, it is an up or down vote. We do not change chair's recommendations. We can't. We have to vote on them as is. So if you hate it, and you know how to vote for it. If you love it, then you love it, and you know how to vote. Okay? Any questions about that? All right, something else I need you to do. Everybody may have noticed that you have your schedule for 2020 in front of you. If you haven't noticed, please pull it out. If you remember, in September, we talked about going from 6 meetings a year to 4 meetings a year. And we've been putting together this schedule, and then I made a typo, and it is my mistake. So I'm going to ask you to pull out a pen or a Sharpie if you're feeling particularly presidential about it, and draw an arrow from June to March. Swap those locations. Columbia is in June. Augusta is in March. Draw yourself a little arc, swap those two for me. That was my error. The contract's been signed for months. I really shouldn't have made that. I don't know what I was thinking. I guess I didn't let Heather proofread it long enough.
You're fine.
Yeah. But,
A little specifying.
well, yeah, checks in the mail, right? One last thing before we get started for the day. I'm not going to say any names because this person would probably kill me if I did. But we do have a birthday coming up in the next couple of days with somebody. And this person does mean a lot to me and to several others in the room. And it would be remiss of me if I didn't mention it. So if I could get everyone to just say happy birthday. Now, it only works if everybody says it. Otherwise, everybody's going to look around for the person who doesn't say happy birthday. So if you could just humor me. 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday! Thank you very much, everybody.
Who is it?
I'll tell you later.
Federico.
All right. It's not. Now, today is my wedding anniversary, but it is not my birthday. Thank you. I wasn't fishing for that at all. Mr. Johnson, are you ready for the DOE update?
Yes, I am.
All right.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Mike Budney, our site manager, is on travel this week, so I'll be sitting here at the table with you for the next day and a half. I'm not going to provide detailed opening remarks today because you'll notice on the agenda I'm slated to give a presentation on the performance metrics on tomorrow, and that normally constitutes a major portion of the update that we do on the opening day. So rather than going through that twice, decided that I would spare you and just provide the more detailed update on tomorrow on the performance rather than doing that today. I know that Gil mentioned it earlier, but I also want to thank the outgoing board members with Doug. I've known Doug through the cab here for quite a few years, and certainly want to thank you for your years of service to the cab, and you'll be greatly missed. And also to Miss Eleanor, here to my right, the same for you as well. I've had the opportunity, I guess for the last 3-4 years since I've been back to interact with you here on the cab, and it's certainly been a pleasure. So thank you for your service as well. And I know Brian is not here today, but certainly we thank him for his service to the cab. Gil stole a little bit of my thunder. This is on the DDFO, announcing that Amy would be replacing Jim Folk as one of the DDFOs. Certainly want to thank Jim, and I believe he's here somewhere, yep, there behind me, for his time serving as the DDFO. I know Jim has been very instrumental and supportive of things here at the cab, and making sure that either his folks or he were here for the respective presentations, and then whenever you're having your pre-cab meeting, that he was always there as the DDFO to support the needs of the cab. And then Gil mentioned it, but Michael Michelanis will continue to serve as the co-DDFO. And because of Michael and Amy's travel, I get the pleasure of serving as the DDFO for tomorrow only. All right. With respect to the budget, we're still under a continuing resolution. It's supposed to expire on November 21st. We've continued to work with the staffers from the appropriators, as well as the rest of the congressional staffers, as to what our budgetary needs are for FY20. We're hoping that those discussions will pay off into a budget, ultimately into a budget that supports the needs of the site. Just as a reminder, the President's budget request for FY20 included $1.6 billion for EM at Savannah River, which was about $91 million more than what was enacted in FY19. Now, that's a pretty significant increase from year to year in the request. But as we work through the process, you know that the President's budget request isn't necessarily what we actually receive from a budget standpoint. We have a house mark that's about $20 million less than the President's budget request. However, that mark provided some additional funding in the nuclear materials area, and also provided design funding for the EMC. The Senate mark, a little bit different. It provides about $20 million more than the President's budget request, and the way that one is marked up is providing some additional support for the salt waste processing facility by moving some funds from the SDU, as well as providing full funding for the AMC. And so if you notice the difference between those two marks, even though it's only $20 million difference, there are considerable things that are different in those two marks. And so as we continue to go through the budget process, you know, there's some things that they will have to work through in their conference. Next point that I want to make is regarding the 2018 annual site environmental report. You probably noticed that that was pulled from the agenda for this CAB meeting. We'd worked the ACER report through the normal channels in order to be able to publicly release it. However, we've been told by headquarters that we were not going to be able to release the 2018 ACER. We have a new EM1 this year, and he's decided that he wants to personally review each of the ACERs before they are released, the remaining ACERs before they are released out to the public. So we've gotten through most of the legwork on the ACERs, and we're just now, the only remaining thing that we have left is allowing him time to be able to personally review the ACER and provide any feedback that we may need to EM1. And the plan is that he will release, or EM will release, all of the remaining ACERs for the complex at the same time. So unfortunately, because of where we were in the process, we weren't able to release it at this time, but as soon as we can get through that, we will be able to release the ACER out to the public. One thing that I can tell you from the report is that it continues to show that we're safely completing our missions at the site, and we are continuing to maintain a record of environmental excellence. We have a pretty robust environmental monitoring program there on the site, and we know that, and it's also corroborated with from the state of South Carolina with some of the additional monitoring that they're doing as well. And we have been producing these reports for since they're more than 5 decades now, since the 1950s, and we will release it to you and brief you on it as soon as we can, as soon as we're cleared by headquarters to do so. And 2 more items. One, just in the past week, we received a notice of violation from South Carolina DHEC, and I just spoke about the great environmental monitoring program that we have, and then I'm speaking on a notice of violation. But what's there on this particular notice, and this was from an event that happened back in the July time frame. Specifically what this was that we'd taken some environmental samples, and this was on we were supposed to do a mercury analysis on the sample, and unfortunately that sample was not analyzed within the 28-day period after the sample was obtained, and that constitutes a notice of violation from the state. But we're continuing to work with the state. And also, the final thing on that was that even though we received the notice of violation, there were no fines or penalties associated with that NOV. And also, because we'd already taken some corrective actions to prevent that problem from happening again there on site, DHEC has not asked us to do any other work with respect to analyzing the samples there on site. The last thing that I want to provide an update on, this is on the deer hunts. For this year, we've had a total of 5 regular deer hunts plus 1 for the wounded warriors. In total, 87 deer and 21 hogs have been taken from the site. We have 6 more hunts scheduled now through December 13th, occurring on Wednesdays and Fridays. And with that, that's the end of my update for today. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Johnson? Keeping in mind that he's going to go a lot more in depth tomorrow. So feel free to use that as an excuse. Dave, let's start with you.
Dave Vabagas, CAB. Thank you very much for your update. In fiscal year 2019, Savannah Riverside operated with a full-year appropriation. And now in fiscal year 2020, SRS is operating under the continuing resolution that you talked about until, at least until November 21st. Is SRS facing any additional challenges under the, with the current current CR, and if CRs go on for a prolonged period, will there be any challenges with hiring new staff or delaying any implementation of scheduled work? And then I also have a concern about, we saw from John Lopez's presentation a while back that the pension funding is increasing over time, and is that an issue for under the current CR as well?
Okay. All right, so there was a lot packed in to what you just asked there, David. I'll try to answer them all, and if I miss any, just kind of remind me a bit here. Now, as far as impacts, there were no significant impacts through the CR through November 21st. And we've looked at various scenarios that have been presented to us as to when the site would begin experiencing any impacts from operating under continuing resolution. And the reason why that's that you may have some impacts is that, and it impacts you really on any new starts that we may have desired to have within the given fiscal year. Particularly, this would be on with some of the SDUs, but we are able to. It depends on when we actually get funding as to how much of an impact there may be from operating under the continuing resolution. The other area where we have a bit of a challenge for us is on the salt waste processing facility. As we, it depends on when we actually move into startup on the facility. The other thing that happens on continuing resolutions, sometimes the funds are not in the particular buckets that you need them, but there is a process that allows us to, if we have another continuing resolution, there's a process that allows us to have funds moved to where we actually need them to be, to minimize any potential impacts. I think the other thing that you asked about was on the staffing side of things there on site. On the federal side, no real impacts to staffing there. On the contractor side, in FY19, there was a significant number of hires that were being made on the site, but you also have to take into consideration a good portion of that hiring was to support the NNSA portion of the program on the site. And so, while not significantly impacting us on the EM side, I've not heard from NNSA that there's any significant impact to them either. I think I answered.
The increase in the pension funding is what I also had a concern
Okay.
about. Is that?
And so there's a couple ways around it on the pension funding. It's not a single payment that's made, and so we're able to provide a payment as soon as possible, and then as funding becomes available, we're able to then make the additional payments or the full payments to fully meet the pension needs for the year. But we don't have too much of a choice when it comes to paying the pension, because those will be paid in full to meet the demand for that given year.
And I guess the only other thing that comes to mind is anomaly funding, which under a CR is occasionally available. Is SRS receiving any anomaly funding during the CR period that you're aware of?
We've gone through different scenarios in the event that continuing resolution was, we go through another, or whether it's a full year or another short term. But I will have to say that, historically, we've not had a whole lot of successes with anomalies, either getting them out of the Office of Environmental Management or getting funded, through the discussions with OMB. So we prepare for them, but we've not really had a whole lot of successes with obtaining things under the anomaly.
Thank you very much.
All right, swing around to the opposite side of the U. AK?
AK Hassan Cab. Deputy Johnson, on the violation that you mentioned in terms of failure to comply, could you state whether it was mechanical, technical, or what the reason was in terms of not meeting the 28-day requirement?
Well, I will start, and I think Matt Millis here can help with this. But I think part of it had to do with having all of the supplies and everything that we needed to actually conduct the sample within the 28-day period. And frankly, there was a little bit of a shortcoming in the system on the site, because we could have gotten it from a different location on site in order to meet the 28-day requirement, but that didn't happen. And so what we've done now is to put a system in place so that, if a particular laboratory doesn't have all of what they need, you just reach out to one of the other labs on site so that you'll be able to get the test done. One, or the second option would be we can go to an off-site lab to have the test done.
Thank you.
Greg?
Thank you, Greg Murray, CAB. I guess the obvious question, follow-up question to that is, did you all end up doing the test, and what kind of result did you get?
Okay, I will leave that to Avery.
Avery Hammett, DOE. Yes, we did end up doing the test and passed the test. So the sample passed. It was just delayed because there were some issues with the calibration of the monitoring equipment or the sample analysis equipment. So that's
Thank
it.
you.
Gil?
Thanks, Thomas, appreciate it. Was that since we're all talking about the notice of violation, was that a department issue or was that a contractor issue?
From my perspective, it was a shortcoming in the system on the site why that test was not conducted within the 28-day period. It wasn't that we didn't have the capability. It was just a shortcoming in the system and how we process it on site.
Okay. And also, I want to thank you and the entire staff. I've banged on it for 2.5, 3 years about the budget and never getting plussed up. But on the Senate mark, you got plussed up 0.04%. And I mean, so I laughed when I saw that number, but I was like, hey, you want to see me do cartwheels? We got plussed up 0.04%. We weren't even or down. So great job. Thank you very much.
I've never heard so much money described as 4/100% before.
That's what it is.
Malcolm?
Malcolm Phillips, CAB. Going back to the NOV, was it self-reported?
Yeah, you're asking, was it self-reported? Yes.
Okay, and I guess that's the reason there was no monetary penalty involved.
Partially, wireless monitoring was down. But the thing is, given the working relationship that we have with DHEC, if we have an issue, I mean, we try to communicate with them as quickly as possible. And it does help when you not only when you self-report, but you also implement good corrective actions as well.
Thank you.
Charles, that seems to have inspired a question for you.
Charles Hilton, CAB. Mr. Johnson, I just salute you for self-reporting.
Can I get you to pull that in closer for me?
Okay. I did laboratory analysis for 45 years, under certified labs, under DHEC jurisdiction. Some of these samples, for those of you who don't know, have a shelf life of 4 hours. Some of them have 30 days. They're all different. It's easy to miss one when you're doing thousands of them, as y'all do. So thank you for at least admitting that you had a problem. Thank you for the way it was handled and self-reporting. And so, it's alarming any time that we get an NOV. I've gotten NOVs in my professional career because of oversights on our part. But it's the way you handle it and the relationship that you have with DHEC. And when you don't get fined, you don't get penalized for these things, it's because of the outstanding relationship you have. So in spite of the fact that you got it, it was handled properly. And that's the thing that's important.
Thank you. And we work hard to try and maintain a good, positive relationship with DHEC, and because we believe that it's important to work with the regulators. And I have to tell you, having worked at headquarters and also at another DOE site, there isn't another site in the EM complex that enjoys as good a relationship with their state regulators as Savannah River does.
Absolutely. Narinder?
Narendra Malik, CAB. What is the status of SWPF? When is it going to be starting? Is it going to be on time?
All right, I have a update on tomorrow on it, but on your question is, will it be on time? That always depends on who you're asking and what schedule you're working against. You know, we have, through the years, we've got a number of facilities that are, and Gil made mention of it during his opening remarks, that are in place and operational, whereas a lot of our other sites often face a lot of challenges in trying to get a facility into operations. Now, for us in SWPF, we've had a lot of challenges over the years, but we believe that we're pretty close on it. Like I said, I've got a detailed update on tomorrow, but the good news on it is that on November 11th, they started the contract operational readiness review for that facility. And that review goes for about 2 weeks, the 11th through the 22nd of November. And then we will then, that review may identify any shortcomings that may exist in the system or in the facility at this point. And I say may in that it will identify it if there's a problem, but we hope that there are few or no problems with the facility. And then the next step for us would be moving on to the Department of Energy operational readiness review. And right now, that's slated to begin likely to begin in the early January time frame. So starting on time, Miranda, is, like I said, it's depending on who you're asking and what schedule you're working against.
All right. Any more questions for DOE? All right. One thing I wanted to point out, for those of you who like to read ahead in your packets, you'll notice that we do have tomorrow's presentations in there. That means the performance metrics presentation that Thomas will be giving is available. We're going to mention this again tomorrow, but I'll go ahead and put it out there. It is markedly different from what you have seen in the past, and there's a very good reason for that. Last year, one of you asked a very astute question: who is being held accountable for this? And Mr. Bundy grabbed the microphone and said, I am. These are my metrics. And we went back and looked at it, and we've had a lot of discussions over the past year. Well, I say we. There have been a lot of discussions about the past year, and then I got told about it. But you'll notice that this presentation looks a little bit different, and that's because this time it literally is the metrics that Mr. Johnson and Mr. Bundy are held accountable for. This is what he presented to his leadership, but just last week?
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago? So you are getting very updated information. Now, in the future, we're probably going to dress it up a little bit more. We'll make it look a little nicer. But in the time frame that we were working in, this is what we were able to put out for you. So I know some of you like to read ahead. Please keep that in mind as you do. And remember that he'll be going over everything tomorrow and explaining it. Okay? Craig, are you ready for EPA? Sure. Let's go.
Good afternoon. I'm Craig Van Trees with the EPA. I am a geologist by training, but my official title is Remedial Project Manager. I was here in the Charleston meeting, but I just wanted to take a second to reintroduce myself, as there may be new faces here. I started with the EPA in June, but before that I worked for the state of Georgia in the Brownfields program. So I am glad to be here. 2 weeks ago, I went to the Savannah River site. I was able to see a few select properties there, which was really educational and fun, and I also took some radiation training. I know that Rob Pope and John Richards could not be here today, and I did check with them. They did not have a specific update to give. However, I am glad to take any questions and relay them back to them, and I will get back to you if there's anything you'd like to know from the EPA's perspective.
Any questions? Then we need to get back to EPA today. Gil.
Hey, thanks for being here, and thanks for coming to Charleston. We appreciate EPA being here. I don't really know how to phrase this, so however you want to take it. I mean, does EPA treat every site the same way, or does it matter on who the manager is over it?
And from what aspect are you speaking when you define treatment?
Yeah, and that's the hard part. Yeah, that's very fair. When I have the opportunity to talk to other sites, it seems to me that EPA is very much involved in their site, and they mention EPA quite a bit. We do have interaction with the EPA, but we don't really, from my standpoint, we don't really hear a whole lot. But when I talk to other sites, be it Nevada, Los Alamos, Oak Ridge, Paducah, Hanford, EPA is always top of mind for them. And with us, and the reason I ask is it because we have such a strong relationship with South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control, or is that normal? Do we have a normal working relationship comparatively?
And Gil, I assume you're speaking in terms of the Citizens Advisory Board?
Yes, sir.
Or the community involvement aspect of other sites like Oak Ridge. I'm on that site too.
Oh, are you? Okay, so that makes sense. Yes, I mean, from a Citizens Advisory perspective, as well as just engagement with the local Department of Energy.
Well, I will follow up with them to get their perspective on that, but is there a gap or is there something you would like to see from the EPA going forward?
No, I'm not asking for anything that specific.
Okay.
I'm looking for a generalization.
Sure, I will follow up with them. I'll be glad to email you what they have to say.
Thanks a lot, I appreciate it.
No problem, Gil.
Any other questions for EPA? Oh, Charles, sorry.
Charles Hilton, Cab. Gil, back to your question. Region 4 Atlanta that deals with, probably has the best reputation in the industry as working with the regulated community. I've dealt with probably 7 of the 9, 11 regions that there are. Obviously, they operate under Washington, but in my perspective of working with the different regions, Region 4 is the place to be. They are reasonable, they work closely with the community, and they actually listen.
And that may be what I'm sensing, Charles.
That's what I've seen. I was at 61 Forsyth Street Friday on an updated seminar, so they work well with the regulated community.
Great, thanks.
All right, anything else? Greg and Graceanne? Graceanne?
Hello, everyone. My name is Grace Ann Martin, and I'm with South Carolina DHEC. I'm subbing in today for Susan in terms of the update for DHEC. And so to begin, I was going to focus more on ESOP, or the Environmental Surveillance and Oversight Program, which is where I'm kind of more familiar. So just to keep you all posted, we are continuing to work on our annual report, and we're starting more of the review process. So hopefully that will be out soon for everyone to peruse. And I guess once that's out, we will be talking with James for our future presentation next year. Now to get to the part that I'm not as familiar, so thankfully we have Greg up here to help answer any questions about FFA. So for FFA soil and groundwater updates, DOE informed us that the land clearing activities initiated the remedial action start date for the G area oil seepage basin 761-13G on September 30th, 2019. This was 1 year ahead of the milestone date of September 30th, 2020. DHEC was able to tour the GOSB on October 8th. DHEC also conducted a site visit of P area groundwater to see the installation of the permeable reactive barrier and wetland area at Dumbarton Bay to view the status of the removal action, which also occurred on October 8th. The sixth 5-year remedy review report for SRS operable units with native soil covers and or land use controls is now publicly available. And building 235F at the end of October, DHEC met with DOE and EPA to discuss the deactivation activities and the transition to decommissioning and CERCLA closure of the facility. This supports the CAB recommendation 364, accelerated deactivation and decommissioning of 235F. In terms of high-level waste, DHEC approved the bulk waste removal of tank 10. This was also approved by the EPA, and the meeting was held, milestone was November 30th, 2019. For SWPF, there was an extension requested for 180 days. So the original date was for January 20th, 2020. It's now been moved to May 7th, 2020. DHEC has reviewed the fourth quarter force majeure report and has submitted the comments to DOE. So if you all have any questions, please let us know. And if Greg or I can't answer them, then we can get in touch with Susan to get you all the correct information.
All right. Any questions for DHEC? Malcolm?
Yeah, Grace, Malcolm Phillips, CAB, you mentioned the extension request. Has there been, over the last, say, 2 years or whatever the periodicity is, similar extension requests or blown deadlines by DOE with regard to the DHEC DOE agreements?
Greg O'Quinn, South Carolina DHEC. In regards to this specific extension request, this was for SWPF. We have honored some of their requests in the past related to the tank farms. And one of the ways we kind of mitigate that is to have a trade-off where they may close out a different area. So sometimes there's that balance where we try to find closing out another area when some of these milestones aren't met.
Malcolm Phillips, CAB again, but the question was, is this routine, the extension request, A, B, are there blown deadlines that y'all have? Is that routine or is that?
Well, like I said, sometimes, you know, the request, the milestones don't look like they're going to be met, so they do send the request, and we try to work with them the best that we can.
Over the last, Malcolm again, over the last year, how many have been like this?
I'm not sure how many requests that we've had come through in the past couple of years, but we can try to get that information to you.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for DHEC? No? Any more backwards? Any more for EPA or DOE? All right. That's it, folks. Thank you, everybody. Up next, we have our committee updates. Eleanor, let's start with your last committee update on the board.
Eleanor Hobson, Administrative and Outreach Committee Chair. Good afternoon and welcome to Augusta. And you have noticed the sights and sounds of Augusta already, I'm quite sure. But we are the Cyber Center of the South. We are also the Medical Center of the South and of Georgia. There is much research being done, cancer research, here at the Medical Center in Augusta. There are many changes taking place in the area because of the cyber community. And as you have the time, I hope that you will tour our city. However, it is really and truly under construction. So watch out for the barrels and the changes in lanes and so forth as you travel through Augusta this evening and tomorrow. Now, this is my goodbye to the Savannah Riverside Cab. It has really been a wonderful experience. It has been a learning experience for me. When I came on board, I was not a chemist. I was not a scientist. I am an educator. I have a bit of scientific knowledge, but not as much as most of the CAB members. I was not intimidated, however, because I was treated with respect as I served my tenure on the CAB. And I express accolades to the Vice Chair of the Administrative and Outreach Committee as she came on board and she moved right along with me. And I'm not going to take up all of your time this afternoon, but since this is my goodbye to you, I see that we are approaching 2020 and many changes will take place in 2020, as you know. Thank you, SRS CAB. for enlightening me and for treating me professionally as I served on the board. For the future, I hope that the experiences of the new CAB members will be as great as mine were or better. Thank you, Doug and Gil, for chairing and co-chairing, and for Doug being the vice chair. And I was surprised today to know that Doug will also depart from the CAB after this meeting today and tomorrow. However, I feel that the CAB is very important to this area, to the CSRA. And if you can clean it up, clean it up. If you can fix it, fix it. This is our mission. And I will continue to watch, observe, and if you need me for anything, please do not hesitate to call upon me. This is the best board that I have served since I have been on boards since I retired. And hats off to you, SRS CAB. I have served under the administration of 4 chairs of the CAB, and I think that is remarkable. And you are all great chairs. Some may be in the audience behind me today. However, I know that Gil is one of the best chairs.
I'm one of the 4.
He's looking at me. He doesn't
I'm one of the
believe-
4, that's all.
He doesn't believe a word that I've just said about him being the best, but he is. Gil, you're great. Keep up the good work. The Administrative and Outreach Committee will not meet this evening after this main meeting of the SRS Board. Thank you. And
Thank you,
goodbye.
Thank you, Eleanor. Thank you.
Several years ago, it was shortly after Eleanor's first year, we needed somebody to come and speak at an orientation. She probably spoke at one of yours. I can't remember exactly whose it was. And we were talking about members who would make a good person to speak to a group of new folks. And, oh, well, Eleanor's nice. You know, she's presents really well. It seems like she would get, and then she came in, and like you'd heard, it was the teacher voice came in, and she spoke to these folks as only a teacher could, and took command of the room. And I want to thank you for that. One of the moments that stuck with me forever. Thank you, Eleanor.
You're welcome.
Up next, facilities disposition and site remediation. Greg.
All righty, thank you very much. Greg Murray, FDSR. And hey, Eleanor, thank you for your service. I did want to ask you, I mean, are you going to invite us all over to your house like Doug did?
Hey, that's not nice.
Sorry. All right, we had our meeting, FDSR meeting on October 23rd. We had a good meeting, I think. 3 things are coming out of it. The committee proposed approval of the DOE response to the solar power study recommendation. It's number 360. And we suggested that it be closed by the CAB, and I think that's on the schedule for tomorrow. So we should be good to go on that, hopefully, or at least for the full CAB to consider it. We dealt with 2 draft recommendations. One was to forward the stakeholder awareness study draft recommendation to the full CAB for consideration, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, I guess, when we talk more about it, I guess this afternoon a little bit. And then we did a second one about a draft recommendation to regarding support for the SREL, and we voted to forward that to the full CAB for consideration and discussion. That's it.
Any questions? I meant to ask. Any questions for either Eleanor or Greg before we move on? All right. Up next, nuclear materials. Charles?
Charles Hilton, CAB. We met last month. We were hoping that we would have a response back from 364 recommendation. That did not occur until October the 30th. I don't think everybody may have picked up on this response from DOE. The recommendation was accepted, but there may have been some questions about dates and some things in there. So I've asked the chairman to hold off on any movement on this until it goes back to committee and let the committee look at this and make sure that it's where we are with it as far as the original recommendation. So with that, if there's no question, that's our report.
Any questions for Charles? Any materials?
James, if you would, I would ask you
Sir.
would you resend this to the full cab?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
It is also online on the website. If you go to cab.srs.gov, click on recommendations, scroll down to 364, and look at the end column. There's the DOE response. But we'll still send it out.
Thank you.
All right. Tom, are you ready for strategic and legacy management?
I am. At our last meeting, we passed a recommendation that we're going to recommend for passing by the full cab tomorrow, and it's on military partnerships with South Carolina National Guard for military training at Savannah River Site. And that's all we have to report.
Any questions for SNLL? All right, then. Waste management. Narendra, sir.
Narendra Malik, Cab. This is my last meeting as a chair. On October 23rd, Greg Murray, Professor Greg Murray, he conducted the meeting. And I heard today this morning that there were a lot of discussions from the public, which may have been political discussions rather than technical discussions. And I think the DDFO conducted very nicely and helped Greg to resolve the issues. We will be having a wonderful meeting tomorrow on the industrial wastewater permitting, and I hope everybody will enjoy it. Thank you.
Where did James go? Okay.
I did not beep him. I did not beep him.
James?
Yeah, just like Scotty beeped me.
He stepped out for a minute. Well, that gives him perfect time because I was trying to figure out something to say. Hey, James. I was trying to look it up real quick right here, but I wanted to take a moment and recognize some of the employees of the site. No one in particular, but I don't know if anyone paid attention last week. I know it was a big deal on site, at least it was apparently in some pictures. The United Way of Aiken County and the United Way wrapped up a campaign, and the employees of the site were extremely generous. Extremely generous. Centera, I see, donated $185,000. The employees got together and donated $185,000. SRS, I know, is broken down into many different categories, and I think Kristen's back there. Kristen, do you know the exact amount, the total amount altogether?
Just over 1.2 million for SRS.
So yeah, SRS, I mean, these are the employees of the site coming together to help people in and around South Carolina, the CSRA. And so, and then I do apologize. I believe SRR, I think I saw something for SRR as well. I just don't have that number. But that's pretty amazing. And I thank each and every person that donated to that campaign. And I know there's more than just that campaign. I know there's a lot of people at the site that are very charitably inclined. But I saw that come across a Facebook feed and I was wowed. So thank everybody who did that, and thank you for our contractors for creating a way for people to work together like that. So thanks.
All right, thank you. Before we move on to our next bit, is there any lingering questions for the committee chairs over what happened last month that we need to deal with before we move on? All right, I'm going to pass out the ballots for the cab election. As you noted, we're not having another meeting until March, so we're rolling the cab chair, vice chair, and committee chair elections into one, which is a first for us. It did take up a whole sheet of paper, so I'm going to ask you to please, when I come back around and collect it, fold it in half for me and slide it into the folder. I really don't want to see who you voted for. I'm going to give it to Delisa and Eleanor, and they're going to go count. Please do me a favor. I know that we're taking a break immediately after this. Don't get up yet. After I collect your ballot, please wait until after I have everyone's before we cut you loose. All right? Any questions about what we're going to do? All right.
And everyone, please wait until we cut you loose. There's something we're going to want to do.
Okay.
Hey, James or Gil, may I say something?
Yes.
Well, I am a political scientist, and there's an election, so of course I want to say something real quick. And I want to say this: I appreciate the opportunity to be considered for the position of vice chair of the CAB. So I want to take a few minutes, just a few minutes, and say a few things about this opportunity and about Narendra in particular. Because he's too humble and won't say things like this, so I'll say him about it. I think Narendra would be a wonderful vice chair. He's smart. He has a great deal of technical knowledge. He served on the board and served very well. He's great at attending meetings and actively leading and making proposals for the CAB. I've enjoyed and learned a lot for the opportunities I've had to work with him. We've authored, I guess, one recommendation, and we've got another one that's waiting in abeyance, I guess, for a little bit later time, and I've enjoyed doing that with him. And I think he'd be a very capable vice chair. Narendra, thank you for all you've done on the CAB. While I haven't had the experience that Narendra's had, I hope that if I'm selected, I would also be a capable vice chair. I have served as vice chair under Narendra of Waste Management, and when there was an emergency opening for the FDSR committee, I reluctantly took that because primarily I had not been involved with the committee, but if I could help out, I did that. So I think you'll see when we vote tomorrow and consider stuff today that we've been able to move some things along. I've authored or co-authored 3 recommendations. I've done some public speaking for the CAB. And by the way, I'll continue to do that regardless of how this works out. I've been active on the A&O committee. Poor James has listened to more suggestions from me than any person deserves to have to listen to, particularly about things about expanding the pool of recruits and public participation. So overall, I think we're lucky to have Narendra running for this, and I think he'd be wonderful at this, and I hope I too could contribute if given that opportunity. And so thank you, fellow CAB members, for listening to me talk about this for a minute. Political scientist, I have to do these things, I guess. And thank you for giving me the floor for a moment.
Narendra, would you like to take comments?
He said enough, thank you.
Okay. In other words, break time. Where's Gil at? Like I say, if you would please fold these in half or in quarters, whatever feels right to you. They just won't all fit very well in here. Full pages. I'll come back if you haven't decided yet. Thank you. I'll come back.
Here, did you do it?
No, he's still working. I got to make another trip around. There's a lot of choices to make today. Oh, no. Anyone else whose ballot I have not collected? Oh, yes, I did. All right. Gil, did you have something you wanted to do first?
Yeah, before we take a break, I wanted to do something a little bit different. And we have some things planned for later on in the meeting. But I wanted to take time just to thank Doug for being our vice chair. And I got a cake for everyone. Now, mind you, the chances of Doug eating a piece of this is probably somewhere around 10 to 15%. So no one will be offended if he doesn't eat it. But Doug, thank you so much. And so if you would, during the break, if you'd like a piece of cake, I'll just move the microphone off my spot and we'll try to figure out how to cut this because
Let's take it to the back row. Or
see,
back,
I'm a guy. I don't know how to do these things. So we'll take it back there.
Just eat it with your hand.
Come together, let's let her get a good picture.
The scoops on.
Thank you. All right, folks. That'll be a 15-minute break, give or take. Let's come back at 2:30, everyone. 2:30.
Greg will get it. Greg will get it.
Before you leave, Greg wanted to clarify the question that you had.
We got almost everybody back. All right, what do you want to do next? We don't have everybody here. How many do we have? 1, 2.
Not me. You're so far away.
Yeah, right. It's a big U shape.
It looks like it is.
We'll give it a few minutes. We'll let everybody find their seats. We'll let Narendra sit down. Let AK sit down.
I just want everyone to know that Gil is sitting down.
Gil is in his place. Gil is ready to go. All right.
Yeah, he did, but he didn't hear me.
So what's next on the agenda? Draft recommendations? You guys want to start with those?
No, when are we going to find out about the election results?
Do you have election results? Let's do election results then. Is that what you guys want to do? You want to hear through one?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I can read it now. Gil, congratulations. Or condolences, as the case may be. You won re-election as the candidate.
I heard there was a write-in campaign.
Yes, and everybody wrote in your name.
Oh. Thank you all. I'm honored. Thank you.
We voted for the billionaires.
Who's
For
that?
vice chair, congratulations go to Greg Murray.
Greg.
Thank you.
A&O, Bobby, we're expecting good things this year. Nuclear materials, Charles, you get to keep the mantle of command. Waste management goes to AK. Strategic and legacy management goes to Jim Giel. And for FDSR, there was a write-in campaign due to a distinct lack of options for Malcolm. Congratulations, sir.
Oh, good.
So, we'll check with you later if you accept. If you really don't want to do it, we'll do another vote. But yeah, let me know after the meeting.
So I want to thank everybody for voting. Narendra and Greg, thank you both for putting your hat in for vice chair. Greg, congratulations.
It's a Greg.
Sir?
Greg is going for vice chair.
Did I say Greg? Did I misspeak?
No, you said that.
Okay. So, but I do appreciate both of you doing that. I know it's gut-wrenching. Thank you for all the new chairs. Jim, AK, Malcolm, if he accepts, and then Charles, welcome back. Charles, just want to let you know about that seat. The person who had it before would not accept a vice chair or a chair nomination because he wouldn't give up nuclear materials chair. So just let you know, you're stuck, bro. You never leave. But thank everybody. These don't become effective until January. Is that correct?
Yeah, we'll do it in January, at the end of the year. So those of you who are currently chairs, we're going to need your continued support through the December committee meetings, and then we'll have the new folks pick up starting in January. All right. So up next, with that all settled for us, that's the dull part. Y'all just want to go home now? Yeah. No? Let's do the recommendations anyway. So out of Strategic and Legacy Management Committee, there was this recommendation on military training activities. Doug and Dan came together and they wrote a good part of this and brought it together. Can I get one of you folks to briefly summarize it? It's been out in the public and out in the board's hands for a while now, so I don't think that we need anybody to read it, but would one of you care to summarize this? Come on, Doug.
Dan Kaminsky, CAP.
Okay, Dan.
So hopefully you've had time at your leisure to read this. There's no glaring details other than the fact that CAP is just looking to support and help them in the sense of declaring a one point of contact. So this is a clean and smoothless process for military commands and other units wishing to train at the Savannah River site. So we as a board, we're just recommending that to establish the South Carolina National Guard be the single point of reference for military and city, state, and federal law enforcement agencies. So it's very short, concise, a little bit of background if anyone has any concerns.
Speaking thereof, any questions, comments, concerns about the military training recommendation that came out? I know there was quite a bit of discussion during the meetings about this. It took a couple tries to get it right. Is this in a good shape? Are there any concerns? Everybody know how they're going to vote tomorrow? Anybody unsure? Tom knows what he's doing. How about the rest of you? Anybody else? Going once? Going twice? All right, folks. So we'll be voting on this tomorrow afternoon towards the end of the day. Up next, the stakeholder awareness study. Greg spent a lot of time on this one. Again, if you can briefly summarize it, and I got a feeling we'll be getting into some of the particulars a little bit more.
We can do that tomorrow, or we're going to do that today a little bit to discuss it?
We're going to be doing the discussion today, so.
Okay.
If you give us a brief summary, we'll discuss it, we'll do the voting tomorrow.
Okay, I will do my best to give you a brief summary. I've talked to a couple of folks about it. Malcolm had some really thoughtful suggestions, and who else? I talked to Dave this morning too a little bit about it, so they have some comments about it. But let me see if I can just give you a real quick rundown on it. This originated in CERCLA, which of course started was about 1980, I guess. It talked about community relations plans. Over the years, it's been called a variety of things, from the CRP, Community Relations Plan, to the SRS Public Involvement Plan, to there was another one, SRS CIP, and finally we're under something, well, that's not true. There was an SRS CRP, and then finally we're operating under the SRS CIP. Not that that matters particularly much, because they all basically say the same thing, and this has to do with how the community is involved with SRS, how SRS communicates with them. So there was a survey in 1991 that has not been updated since then, and basically what this is about, as I understand it, and is twisted and turned through all these different versions, is it's a mechanism to assess what the public's concerns are about SRS, how the public wants to be involved in the environmental management program and cleanup, the types of information that they would like to receive, and the best ways to deliver that information. So that's the idea behind collecting this information. Like I said, this originated in the early 90s. The last time it was actually done, although there was no survey done, as I understand it, the last time anything was done on this was 2011. It's supposed to be updated. This CIP is supposed to be updated every 3 years. To my knowledge, it hasn't been. So where we are now is we've got something that hasn't been updated. It's been, this information has not been formally collected since the early 90s. And since that time, obviously, a lot of different things have happened, and the cleanup efforts evolved quite a bit. There's a substantial number of DWPF canisters filled. Several tanks have been closed. You have several, 400 plus FFA website units have been remediated. And also our budgets, as we've talked about, have been changing, or not our budgets, the SRS budgets have been changing, and a lot of people feel maybe not keeping up with some of the needs that are required. So the push behind this is that it's important to see how the communities feel about this, what their community concerns are, how they want to be involved, what information they want, and how do they want to get it, and that's the intention of this survey. Malcolm might want to say something at this point, but I will say, a model for this was done by the Nevada board. I think several people have some concerns about how that was done, and maybe if we're going to do this, if DOE decides to do this, that we want to make sure and do it in a scientifically valid way so that we can count on whatever information comes out of this. And so yeah, I will leave it at that. That is the idea behind this recommendation, or draft recommendation.
Folks. So with that, any questions, comments, concerns about the recommendation? Dan, I think your part is up first.
Dan Kaminsky, CAB. Greg, great job. Really appreciate the hard work it takes to put some of these recommendations together. Is this something that maybe we have envisioned as maybe an ad hoc committee to put together that survey with the team, or would this be in committee?
Greg Murray, Cab. My understanding is, there's not been a formal process laid out, other than I think the idea behind it is it's supposed to be done in conjunction with DOE. Of course, they're the one who would implement anything we would do. So how we put it together, I think would be up to us. I think we'd certainly want to include DOE folks in that effort to make sure we're doing the most effective survey we can. I don't know if we want to do it in one of the committees, if we want an ad hoc committee to do it, or how we want to do it. So I guess my answer to that is a long way of saying that hasn't been determined. There are probably a variety of things that could be done, but just want to do it smartly, however we do it.
And James, if it's not too late to just fix something, second line missing the word "do."
At the very top or here?
Very top.
Thanks, Dan.
Right there.
I do not have. She's marking it down. We'll change it for tomorrow because we got the PDF open instead of Word doc. Dave.
Dave Vavagas, Cab. Greg, thank you. This is very well written, but I've got some differences on this. And you tease us in the background section by starting that it is not clear that our community understands, for instance, that the Office of Environmental Management and the National Nuclear Security Administration operate as separate entities with separate missions. I'm okay with that. But so once the survey is completed, the outreach effort is going to help us understand how all the pieces of the site fit together. You're going to tell us with outreach about the MOX failure and pit production and what happens if SRNL moves to the Office of Science. That's wrong. You can't talk about any of that, and any of the outreach is only going to be, EM scope. My belief is that the people who want to know more about SRS have an abundance of resources already available to them. The DOE website's a good place to start. EM and NNSA both have websites full of information. SRS and CAB have websites. The Aiken Standard newspaper does a great job of covering SRS and related issues. And also have a question about what is the stakeholder population? Is it Aiken and Augusta, or does it include the Hilton Head, Bluffton, Beaufort, South Carolina area? The sample size could have quite a range. The recommendation states that the CAB requests that this survey, in order to ascertain its understanding of SRS EM activities, and I will add that only SRS EM activities, not NNSA. So I just don't see how this will change any of the, quote, misconceptions about SRS.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Greg Murray, Cab. First of all, let me address the stakeholder population issue because I think that one's easy to knock out. I'm assuming that we have a definition of what our jurisdiction is. James, is that true? I mean, I know if nothing else, we've got...
We have a definition of where we pull board members from.
Right. So, I mean, worst case, that would be our definition of our population. I haven't thought a great deal about the sampling, other than you're probably going to have to do some sort of stratified sampling to make sure you get people from all the areas. But it depends on what you're wanting to, what kind of representation you want. I think that's something that could be addressed in the discussion and writing of the survey. If this moves forward, you've got a choice between how much population you want represented in geographic representation. My suspicion is that if you wanted just to maximize population representation, you'd probably just do Augusta, North Augusta, Aiken, and Columbia. But I don't think I don't know if that's what people want to do. That'd be something to be discussed. So I think we probably have leverage on defining the population. It's just something I think that would have to be determined. James, is that kind of your idea? You think I think we could define it, the population?
So let me say it like this. Do you feel like defining the population would be more important for communicating with DOE about it? Or do you feel like that's something that could be worked out if the department accepts the recommendation and you move on?
That would-
Go through the process. Do you really need to define this now? Do we need to get that specific with it? And I don't know that we do, but
Right.
we'll write in whatever you guys want to write in.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think if, you know, if there's a strong CAB sentiment to write it in, then we can do it. I don't think it's important at this point, but certainly, you know, we can do that if that makes sense to folks. Regarding the other issue about differentiating between, for instance, NNSA and EM activities and those sorts of things, we talked about this in a little bit in the committee meeting. There's a risk here. I don't know if it's a risk or if it's just important information to have, that we will get out there, or that if this survey is done, we'll get out there and find that nobody knows a darn thing about what the CAB does or knows anything about the environmental cleanup effort, anything like that. So I would argue that's important information to have. Maybe it's not. So that's something I think that would have to be determined in whatever the writing process turns out to be. I do think it's useful for us to know whether people differentiate between NNSA and EM activities or not, and for us to know whether people do that. As the discussion went earlier today, and I think it's probably true, and I think, Dave, you said this, and I don't know, so if I don't characterize this right, please say something. My impression is that people are primarily interested in the economic impacts of SRS, as well as they still focus a lot on the weapons production issue. You know, if that's true, if they are interested in those two things, and it is just economic impact in weapons production, we know that weapons production isn't our thing, so maybe we need to learn from this, or something we would learn from this, is that when we're talking about the virtues or whatever's happening with the CAB and the EM mission, that what we really focus on is the economic benefit of it, or not. So that might be the way to approach that. That would be my argument in that regard. Oh, in terms of the last thing, I think this is right, and I think Malcolm actually brought this up too. You know, we know that, we all know this. If people want to know about what's going on out there, people want to inform themselves, they can go on the website. There's lots of information out there. I think the issue is that people don't do that. And there's this issue between disclosure and transparency, and James and I have had conversations about this. There's a big difference in the trust generated by being transparent. In other words, people can find all kinds of information that they want, and the agency actively disclosing it. And what you find, I believe, is the case, is that when an agency actively discloses, it engenders more trust in that agency. So I think that's part of that argument as well. Did I get everything, Dave?
I think so. Thank you.
All right, AK, and then Carl.
Yes, AK Hassan Cab. It is my sense, based on the discussion, that if DOE accepts the recommendation, that there's likely to be some changes and modification. But beyond that, I'm asking Greg, based on how your draft is currently written, and since we will be asking for funding, what is your perception of the amount of funding that we're talking about?
Greg Murray, CAB. I've thought about this a little bit, and I have not nailed down what I think would be a real accurate estimate. A lot of it comes down to how you're doing the sampling. If you just do a population where you're saying, okay, we have, and you just pick whatever number you want, you know, 1 million people that we're interested in the opinions of, which would be a general sample, that's much easier to get a sample like that than it is to say, okay, we need a certain sample in Beaufort, we need a certain sample in Augusta, we need a certain sample in Aiken or North Augusta or whatever it is, you know. And if you're having to stratify your sample or something along those lines, you're talking about something much more extensive probably, because you'd have probably precisely is the best term to use, to precisely represent the views in general and say Beaufort, you're going to have to get a huge sample, right? Or you're going to have to get a much larger sample than if you just say, okay, I'm going to grab the opinions of people in the area generally, where you could probably end up with something probably in the 500 to 600 range number of people. If you go individually in these towns and do that, you're probably talking tripling, quadrupling that sample size, which is going to dramatically drive up the cost. So that's a long way of getting around saying that, one, I'm not exactly sure. It wouldn't shock me to spend $7,500, $10,000 doing something like this, depending on how well you want to do it. And the other question that's really important to that is what, let's see how to put it. How split are the opinions regarding an issue? So for instance, if you say to somebody, do you support the environmental management effort out at SRS? And the question is yes or no, and you find that people are 50-50 split. Some people say, no, I don't support it. Some people say, yes, I do. Then you've got to have a much larger sample than if it's 90-10. If 90% of the people say they support it and 10% of the people say they don't support it, because you end up with a margin of error issue without walking off into the weeds too much. But in that case, you've got to have a much larger sample if you think it's more split. So that's going to drive that as well. It comes down to, if people really want to do it, it'd be really easy to spend $15,000, $20,000 on this if they really want to do it. I don't think it's necessary. Don't hold me to that number. I can't promise you that. And I do suspect that if, after looking at all the details and pricing it out, DOE looked at it and said, you know what, we're just not willing to spend that much money on it, they're going to kill it anyhow. So they may feel $5,000 too much to spend on this. I don't know. So we'll have to see. We'll have to see that and kind of see what. I think you have to scope it out first and see kind of what you're looking at before you can really make a determination or get a good sense of that.
Anybody else just have flashbacks to a research methods class? Carl.
Yeah, Carl. Excuse me, Carl Steenkamp. I think at the end of Greg's comments, he pretty much summed it up. I've got quite a few years background in national survey research companies and local institutions, but the economic impact certainly is an issue, the safety or risk impact, and then people have a lot of opinions because of the military involvement. So I don't think we should get too far ahead right now and maybe work this out in a committee. And we really need to very quickly get DOE approval of the concept before we get too far. But I think it's a great idea. I'd love to see it, and I'd be glad to participate.
Craig?
Craig Van Trees, US EPA. This is more a comment than a question. We do have a group of community involvement coordinators at the EPA that might be able to assist thinking through something like this. The guy assigned to this project is Kyle Bryant, so if the board decides to move forward with the Unity assistance, just reach out to us and let us know. Thanks.
Good to know.
Thank you. Thank you.
Malcolm.
Malcolm Phillips, CAB. This is a troubling recommendation for me for a number of reasons, and I discussed it in the committee meeting. The Nevada site report, as an example, as Greg knows, and we've discussed this openly, was a flawed report. They tried to draw statistical significance off of sample sizes of maybe 2. And so how do you draw some significance over a sample size of 2 and make it even make sense? So the Nevada report was flawed. To say that you can do this for 5K or even 15K on a level where you need to get detailed community understanding is, that's pie in the sky. It's going to cost a lot more than that. But my primary concern and comment revolves around, if EM has a requirement to do this, why isn't our recommendation, EM, fulfill your requirement and do the report that you're required, not try to tell them what to do, because telling them what to do, is this going to fulfill their report, or do they have to do something different? Our recommendation should be, hey, y'all guys got a report that you were supposed to do. You did it last in 2011. You're required to update it every X years. Update it.
Okay, back to me, I guess. I enjoyed, Malcolm and I had some very interesting, I think, informative conversations about this, and I appreciate his thoughts on it. I understand he has some concerns about it. Regarding the last issue, you know, I think there's a lot of validity to that comment. If you look back at recommendation 338, that's basically where we asked them to do this essentially this thing, and they said they would do it, and it still hasn't been done. So you know, this is what led me to believe, or to say that in the end it comes down to their willingness to do it or not. We could come up with a beautiful, you know, a beautiful survey, and it could cost, you know, $500,000 or $50, and if they don't want to do it, they're not going to do it. So to a degree, I'm not too hung up on the cost now, unless we got some feedback from them that said, all right, we're willing to, you know, to allow a certain amount of money to do it with, and then we could kind of budget around it and figure out if we could do it or not. In terms, excuse me, in terms of the Nevada survey and it being flawed, I absolutely agree with you. That's why those details are in there about the sample, and we want to make sure it's scientific. Yeah, I personally don't, well, I think a lot of people would support me who think about survey, professional level survey. I don't think you can draw any conclusions from the Nevada survey because their sample's not big enough and they try to cut it up too finely. I wouldn't even support this if I feel like we couldn't do a reasonable survey, one that we could actually trust the results. So I mean, I don't think you and I are too far off on this. It's just an issue of whether we want to push it or not. I would suggest we push it, see what we can come up with, recognizing that DOE may just say, no, we're not interested, or they may say they're interested and not end up doing it, or, you know, I think we should try. I think it's part of our sort of, oversight's probably overused these days, but it's part of our sort of something we should be doing to kind of do our job on the cab. Did I get everything sort of? I think I got everything. I made notes, so I tried to.
Okay. Any other voices that want to get in on this? Any questions, comments, concerns? Dave?
Dave Vavagas, Cab. Greg, are you willing to pull out any reference to NNSA in the background?
Sure.
Okay. Why don't you two get together after the meeting, wordsmith it just a little bit and give it to us, and we'll have a cleaned up version of that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for the discussion. It's interesting.
Any other comments before we move on? Everybody know how they're going to vote tomorrow? Charles doesn't know yet, but he doesn't have any comments, so we're okay. Everybody else good? All right, let's move on. Up next, we have another draft recommendation from Facilities and Greg, and that's the DOE support for SREL for the Ecology Laboratory. And Greg, can you give us a summary of this one?
I can, but y'all are keeping me from my cake that I've got sitting here looking at, but I will try to do this quickly. This is a draft recommendation for DOE support for SERL. As you all may recall, they made a presentation to us in January. Dr. Rhodes did, and there are a couple of slides in his presentation where he suggested things that he believed it would be useful for them to get their funding shored up. I think there's a very important point to be made about SREL. It is a unique place. It's one of the places we figure out, not we, that people figure out what needs to be cleaned up out at the site and what doesn't. What they do is really important. It provides important information, and to a large degree, when people use the word unique, I think it's overused a lot. Our site is unique in a lot of its characteristics and a lot of the things you can do with it scientifically. So it is really important. The lab lives a lot on external funding. So what they had asked for suggested that it would be very helpful to them if their base funding from DOE would be increased to stabilize, I guess, for lack of a better term, their pursuit of their mission. And that would be, in the 4 points down there, were continue to fully implement its missions, including, you can see those research topics that it talks about there, as well as some basic stuff in terms of facilities and equipment and some staffing to, again, pursue its basic missions, to maintain its academic output in terms of both research productivity, which is some of the stuff that gets to exactly the questions that people are interested in, what needs to be cleaned up, what doesn't, as well as an educational portion of it in terms of graduate and even undergraduate research. We focused on the graduate issue there, but the other academic opportunities that it talks about are really undergraduate internships and some things like that, as well as the important, going back to the outreach question, the important aspect of doing outreach to the public about what's going on. So that sort of summarizes real quickly this draft recommendation. We appreciate your consideration of it.
All right. Any questions or comments about this one? Malcolm?
Yep, there's just one typo, and I'll just get with you afterwards.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Anything else? Dan?
Probably same typo, 1A.
1A.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dose instead of dose.
Oh. About 1 billion people read this. That's awesome. All right. Any others that are not dose? Questions, comments, concerns? Everybody knows how they're going to vote tomorrow? Dave? Yes, sir.
Just have one question. This is shown as a facilities disposition and site remediation committee recommendation. Should this really be a strategic and legacy management requisition or recommendation? Excuse me.
No, I think the presentation that was made was 2 facilities. I mean, in theory, at this point, it's at the board and we're here.
This is requesting resources, budget resources. So that's why I'm asking the question in the recommendation. So.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Narendra Malakab, David, I think it belongs to Greg's committee because it requires the cleaning up of the site, although it's related to budget, but in other recommendations we have asked DOE to provide budget for expediting the cleaning of the site. So I believe that it belongs to Greg's committee.
Now, if there are concerns from a strategic and legacy management viewpoint, please, members of that committee, feel free to speak up. It's partially why we bring everything here. But, once it works its way through a committee and we're here in front of the full board, now's the time to get everybody's eyes, ears, and thoughts on it. Literary boots on the ground, as it were. Any other concerns? Okay. That's these. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, folks.
Gil, you made it back just in time. We're going to start on the chair's recommendations.
Which one do you want to start with?
Improving EMSSAB and public engagement in the DOE environmental management budget process.
Okay. So this was a recommendation brought forth at the EMSSAB, basically what we call the all chairs meeting. And I'll go ahead and just read it because it is new to us. And if we have any questions, please feel free to ask. Doug and I will answer best we can. James is here. Amy's here. She was here. We were there when they presented it. So starting off the top here, each Department of Energy Office of Environmental Management site is unique in its stage of cleanup. Some are smaller, some are closer to the end of their cleanup, and some have decades to go. Because of the uniqueness, difference in size, complexity, federal facility agreement, and length of cleanup, the level of budget detail needed by each board may be different. The 8 citizens advisory boards that make up the EM's site-specific advisory board that provide recommendations, advice, and public perspectives to their local DOE EM management believe that it is important to provide well-informed and timely recommendations, advice, and comments regarding priorities at their sites. In order to do that, they need to have an adequate level of priority planning detailed provided in time to deliberate, develop, and transmit timely recommendations to their respective local DOE/EM management. Considerations of our recommendations while the local EM offices are developing their priorities and budget requests, and prior to local offices transmitting their priorities and budget requests to DOE/EM headquarters, is in the spirit of transparency and collaboration. The EM-SSAB recommends that 1, DOE engage the local boards that make up EM-SSAB in the December, January, February timeframe in the budget process to ensure adequate time for the boards to be able to provide informed advice/recommendations for submittal to their local DOE/EM management for review and consideration as local priorities and budget requests are being developed. 2, local EM sites offices work with their advisory boards early in the December, January, February timeframe to identify the level of priority and budget detail that each board needs to discuss and develop informed advice/recommendations in time for DOE consideration as they develop their budget request submittal to DOE/EM HQ or headquarters. Excuse me. For larger sites with multiple cleanup actions, the details should include an integrated priority planning list that identifies those cleanup activities that would be delayed if funding levels are not sufficient or if unplanned/emerging issues must be addressed. 3, DOE/EM HQ relay to the local EM offices whatever guidance is required in the December, January, February timeframe to ensure that the information local advisory boards need in order to understand and develop priorities and budget advice recommendations are submitted to local EM management for review and consideration prior to the budget request submittal to HQ deadlines. I'm not going to read the rest of the part. If you'd like to, go right ahead. Any questions?
And remember, you may take issue with the wording, but we will not be changing any. This is what every board is voting on. Your votes will be an up or down vote. So if you have concerns about it or support that you'd like to voice, please feel free. Tomorrow we'll be voting up and down expressly on this document as it is written and appears in front of you. With that, AK, let's start with you.
Yeah. AK Hassan Cab. I'm not sure if my thought process about the federal government's budget timelines are correct, so I need clarification. And considering the chairs have done work on this, I'm sure you're probably accurate. I just need to be clear. It's my understanding that when I hear a lot about the federal government, it centers around September 1st, September 30th, and October 1st as far as closing the budget year and beginning the budget year, et cetera. And if that is correct, then the timeline that's being proposed between January and February, et cetera, is that the best opportunity for us to get the input, to have time to put the input that we're seeking? And like I say, it may be conflict in my mind in terms of what I've heard over the years about September 30th and October 1st, et cetera.
That's a great question. And what this recommendation is dealing with is with budget formation and formulation. I mean, before it gets to the time when the budget's rolled out. So this is happening, when do we do the IPL list? 2 years, 3 years in front?
Yeah.
So we're talking about literally 2 years or 3 years before. And as this recommendation got brought forward to the all-chair board, I commented, we already have this at Savannah River. Savannah River DOE already does this for us. So we're comfortable, as far as I was concerned, I was comfortable with this recommendation because we already operate in this. I guess some of the other sites aren't getting as much information as we have John Lopez that comes and briefs us frequently. He's on the agenda tomorrow. And this was really, in my opinion, it was a non-factor for Savannah River site because we already operate under this standard. So, Doug, is that how you took it?
Yeah.
So not to put words in your mouth, but just to help out. This is more about assisting the other boards from your perspective than it is anything that you feel like SRS CAB would benefit from.
Yeah, it doesn't. This doesn't affect us one way or the other.
So this is just information for us, or are we going to be asked to vote on it?
We will be asked to vote on it. If, I mean, and this board can vote up or down, just like James said. To give you an idea of the process, and we vote, we're an up and down board. The all chairs is a consensus board. And so if one site dissents, the motion, the recommendation fails. Since this did not affect, Doug and I talked about it, since it didn't affect Savannah River site, we're fine with this coming to our board for a vote and saying it's okay for Hanford, Los Alamos, Oak Ridge, Idaho National Lab, whatever. If they're asking for this because they don't feel they're getting that support, that's fine. That was kind of my view. I don't want to speak for Doug. He's still here. So, I mean, later when he's gone, I'll speak for him.
Doug, while you're still here.
Yeah, while I'm still here, 4242 Chartres. No, just kidding. No, but what Gil and I had talked about is that sort of one team, one fight type deal. I mean, if they're not getting the information the way we are, then they should be. And we want to support them on that, you know, to ensure that they're getting the timely information as we get from John Lopez, so that they can, you know, make wise decisions and do their IPL and their work plans same way we do ours.
Any other questions around the table? Tom, I thought I saw you putting yours up. No, you good? Okay. I'll let James back to run his normally scheduled
Sorry,
portion.
I was just getting the public comment sign-up sheet because we are getting very, very close. Any other questions, comments, concerns about this recommendation? Malcolm, yes, sir.
Malcolm Phillips Cab. It's not really a concern, but it's an interesting observation. Gil, you talked about how they do it here, and I'm new on the board, so I haven't got a history at all. It's interesting that they're giving us in-process budget data before the sausage is made, you know, kind of, which generally people don't like to do. So that's just an interesting.
DOE has been, I mean, as long as I've been on the board, has been very open. DOE SRS, SR, has been very open in asking the CAB, what are our priorities? What do we see as a need? And that's been an ongoing open conversation for ever since I've been on the board. Now, how much weight do we carry? I guess that's subjective, but DOE's always been very open through two site managers to say, well, CAB, what are your concerns and what do we need to be looking at moving forward? And they've brought that in very early, and I think that's a great question to ask John tomorrow.
In Malcolm again, in regard to this, though, the recommendation suggests that it's not just asking us for what our thoughts are, it's providing us preliminary budget data and priority lists that they have that we then comment on, which is it's like a board of directors, trying to figure out a budget and trying to provide the shareholders, that never happens. Is that what happens, really?
Going into that depth, Malcolm, maybe not to that point. Go ahead.
I was going to say, it has less to do with trying to assign dollar amounts to things than it is with just assigning a priority. What do you think should receive its full funding over something that should not? So we try to steer away from looking at dollar amounts because it's kind of irrelevant in terms of what do you think is the most important projects.
So we have said as a CAB for at least 5 years, that's all I'm going to go back for. I think most of us have been around for a while. The number one priority of the CAB is liquid waste mission. Hi, Jim. At Savannah River site. We've said that over and over and over and over and over again. And I have a feeling that this board will continue to say that liquid mission. Hi, Jim. It will keep saying that over and over and over again. So we do get that level. Now, Malcolm, I think what you're asking is a very astute and very direct question. Do other sites maybe want a little bit more information? Yeah, I think they may want some more information. Are they going to get it? It's a recommendation. We'll find out.
Okay. Thank you.
Dave.
Dave Vavakas, Cab. I just don't get the dates because December, January, February, that's when you're releasing the president's budget, and you're not really even starting the development of the next budget until April, May, June. So I don't, it just seems like you're not going to get a lot of information in December, January, and February. I just don't understand the dates.
I don't remember who it was, but that very question was brought up at the table, around the table. That somebody asked that question, but quite honestly, I mean, I stepped out of this conversation because I didn't have an objection to it. But there was I think it was Paducah that was asking that question. What's that do?
Dan?
So Gil, prior, when I was a committee chair in the past, I had to help create the IPL letter one of the years. And really the December, January, February timeframe really does play into the April timeframe because we as a CAB, we need that information that far in advance to be able to draft that letter, get some consensus among our fellow CAB members, and present that to John Lopez and his team as they go forward with their budget recommendations for the next cycle. So, AK, you talked about September. Well, this December is like a year and a half before that, so it's way out there. And if you're new on the CAB, you might not have seen what I think John calls the spiral of death with regards to the way the budgets grind themselves into existence, hopefully, or we get continuous resolutions instead. But in either case, I think it'll make a little more sense to you once you see a cycle. I don't know, I don't recall how many of the new members really saw the IPL letter this year. I know we did a lot of tweaking, a lot of discussions, and some fine tuning of it.
Right. I mean, we started working on it in March and actually had to push back into May where we finally voted on it, where you finally voted on it. Any more comments on this one? Charles
Hilton, CAB. The question's come up several times in my mind as we've had this discussion. Dan, it just came up again with your comments. It's almost a different subject that concerns me, but we're going from 6 to 4 meetings.
Mm-hmm.
Are we going to lose something in this, in our ability to influence things? I know the IPL process is a long time off. I also know the difference between president's budgets, which in my mind is meaningless because Congress is the one that enacts money. But I also know the process with CRs and all of this stuff. It's a twofold question. When we reduce our meeting schedule to 4 from the 6, and I'm probably going to get shot by people that still work, that have jobs and have limited time, but at the same time it concerns me. Does the government want our input or not when we're starting to reduce meetings? And I know quorums, I've had all the arguments, I've listened to all that.
Traditionally in the past, John has come in, or somebody in his role has come in January timeframe, given a preparatory presentation on the IPL to gear you up so that you're ready to roll in March and you can draft that letter and send it in. I know that we're probably still going to be looking at that March-ish time frame, because if not, it'll be June before you can actually send it again. How that's going to influence the presentation of information and the way that we're able to prep for it, that's something that we're going to have to look at as we start forming the work plan and how can we disseminate things, what can we do. That's been a question in my mind as well. I don't have an answer for you yet, but I can tell you that I know that people who are a lot smarter than me are thinking about it and trying to figure out how to get you the best information you can so that you can make the most informed decisions that you can. That doesn't make you feel better at all, does it? Okay.
Charles, I know one of the things that's really bothered James, and James has brought it up to me on numerous occasions over numerous years. One of his things is how do we get new board members up to speed so they can participate in the IPL conversation, because that's their first meeting. And he and I talked about this on the way back from Utah. No, Idaho. Yeah. We may have been on the way back. It could have been on the way back. It could have been way back. Utah. And as he and I, I mean, we've talked about this for 2-3 years, and it's not exactly everything you're talking about, but it is part of it. There's no way to have somebody who's new to this board be prepared for the IPL letter within 2 meetings, and to do it in one is, unless they have an intricate understanding of the management of the Savannah River site, can they be prepared for that conversation. So unfortunately, this board can switch over a third every year, and in a situation when we have 6 new board members, and that was Dan and my class was 6 or so. It's very difficult. So we really do have to, even going from 5 to 4, because that's what we're going to. We're going from 5 to 4 meetings.
6.
Well, the planning session isn't an open meeting.
Well, the work plan isn't, but January is when you get it. Like at the January full board is when he would do it.
Is that when we did the IPL, January 4th?
That's when he would do the prep work.
And then
in
we would
March-
do the letter in March.
Yeah, so really it would be one full open meeting. That's what new members had to do right out the gate and have had to do for years.
Right. So but the new members missed the January.
They did.
Missed the January. It's interesting you bring this up, Charles, today. I anticipated that objection at the last meeting when it was said that we were going to go to 4. But DOE, I'm not going to defend DOE. Lord knows, there's been times I think they're right, and there's been times I think they're wrong. But I do thoroughly believe that DOE Savannah River wants our input and wants to know what our input is in everything. How much weight does that carry? We can argue that afterwards. But DOE Savannah River, Jack Craig was this way. Mike Budney's been this way, and their leadership down from them have always been what do you think? We want to know what you think. With that being said, we need to be, as a CAB, as a board, as a full board, as committees, we need to be engaged and digging into it, and you clearly are. As nuclear materials chair, you've definitely got in. But each and every one of us around the table, it's only as good as what we put into is what we get out. So, but I get you going from, because 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago when we talked about this, the board, the CAB fought tooth and nail. It was like, no, we don't want to do that. That didn't happen this time.
Okay. Charles.
Charles Hilton, CAB. I fully appreciate your comments, Gil. I still struggle with the IPL letter.
Why?
I mean, I've been on this thing 3 years. I supposedly have a better working knowledge.
You do?
Sometimes these things are out in left field for me. I don't have as quick a grasp as some, maybe on finances or whatever. And it concerns me, and I know where I was the first board meeting I had. Lord, what did they just talk about for 2 days? I was still in my dictionary that James gave me looking up the acronyms that everybody was throwing around. And it concerns me that when people give their time, we need to be able to accommodate the learning curve with as much time and meetings as we need to do that. And like I say, this direction has concerned me of going to the 4 for quite some time. Ever since we first were made aware that discussions were going in that direction. And I think this discussion with this recommendation just further solidifies my concern with it, and especially for our new board members. I know every one of us that's been on here for 3 or 4 years still struggle to keep up with the conversations because there's so much expertise in this room. There are some brilliant minds, both on DOE, the contractors, and on this board. There's some brilliant people in here. And we just need to make sure that everybody is on board as we go through the processes.
AK.
AK Hassan Cab. In terms of just elaborating on the point that, about new board members, this being my first year now, and the issue of Charles bringing up about fewer meetings, et cetera, I think if there's nothing prohibited as far as the federal statutes, et cetera, that if we look at more aggressively, once a person, excuse me, a new member receive their information from Washington, D.C., and they officially accept being a part of the CAB, that we start to provide them information in terms of what's currently going on before the CAB, invite them into meetings, and maybe give them access to staff or representatives from the board to ask questions. They wouldn't have any voting power or anything, but they would be involved in the ongoing process of what the board is undertaking as a part of its missions, and that could be a part of the education occurred. It wouldn't rectify the situation completely, but it certainly would give them exposure to the items that are on the agenda that are ongoing.
I think that's a great idea, and it was that very idea was recommended to me by when I became a CAB member 5 years ago. Was okay, you've been selected, and we have a meeting in December, and then I was invited to that meeting, and I went and sat there and was completely dumbfounded because I didn't have a clue what anyone was saying. But I mean, I started. Yeah, that's a great idea. I remember Clint Dangle. And I was like, what's he talking about?
Any other questions or comments about this one? Do we know, as everyone around the table, do you know how you feel about this for tomorrow? I think there's some other issues we need to discuss, but for this in particular, does everybody know how they feel about it for tomorrow? Are we ready to move on?
And there's no pressure to vote yay or nay on it. It's whatever this board wants. It's not an issue.
Speaking of yay or nay. Oh, yes, sir, Mr. Johnson.
Hey, James, I just wanted the board to be able to move through its discussion, but I want to respond back to Mr. Hilton. Absolutely, DOE values the input from this board, and we still want input from the board. Even though we're moving from the 6 meetings down to 4, we still value this board.
Charles Hilton, CAB. And Mr. Johnson, I believe that with all my heart. But at the same time, the material for us civilians, we'll just call it that, it's difficult. And to digest, I'm just concerned, especially for someone that has no background in this, it's going to be difficult to keep them up to date and to bring them up to speed as quick as maybe we possibly could with additional meetings. I don't question the sincerity of what you just said. I believe that DOE Aiken has a strong propensity to listen to this board. I do believe that from the bottom of my heart.
Okay. Moving on. Let's pick up with the transportation recommendation.
Recommendation on the disposition and transport of nuclear material. The waste isolation pilot project transport program has been incredibly successful in helping accomplish the task of safe movement of transuranic or true waste to Carlsbad, New Mexico from multiple DOE environmental management sites beginning in '99. As members of EM-specific SSAB, we laud the collaborative work between DOE and the western states in the development and execution of this plan and the ongoing cleanup, transportation, and disposition of true waste and other shipments thus far. We understand that the program includes common sense elements that exceed regulatory requirements. The SSAB chairs agree that safe transport of waste material to its permanent disposition address, one of the most important goals that the DOE-EM complex has undertaken. We urge you not to undervalue the importance of this program, which will be needed far into the future in order to address remaining true at all DOE-EM sites. DOE activities are funded by Congress through its annual appropriation process. Within that appropriation framework, DOE requests funds necessary to support long-term obligations within its statutory and regulatory requirements. It is important to the EM-SSAB chairs that DOE-EM, when dispositioning waste off-site, strive to move all DOE-EM regulated waste material, including true waste, once to its final disposition. We appreciate this opportunity to share our observation and applaud DOE-EM's continued focus on solution for nuclear waste disposition and safe transport to permanent repositories. It is recommended that DOE-EM prioritize development of final disposition sites with the goal of reducing interim storage footprint at each of the sites. Specify waste acceptance criteria for all forms of waste and spent nuclear fuel in a manner that will allow all sites to proceed with waste processing confidently, efficiently, and without delay. Continue to insist on a compliant budget that will provide sufficient funding to act without delay nor impediment to prepare waste for shipment. Create a transportation program for the safe and uneventful shipment of all EM waste material.
Would you like to provide any commentary first before we open it up?
No.
Doug, how about you?
Well, I can say that they did, during the presentation, we saw a very interesting film on the safety of transportation of nuclear material throughout the U.S. And the fact that they reiterated that safety was one of their number one priorities. So, and hopefully that is their number one priority.
Tom, we'll start with you.
Tom French, the cab. I just wanted to, Gil or Doug, if you could tell me what was the problem you're trying to solve? I mean, this recommendation covers everything that we all want to do, and I can't figure out exactly what problem that the group had that this will solve. So you can help me.
As in all boards, there are people that have pet projects and want something to go through. There's a contingency from another site that this is Gil's perception. Doug and I agree for the most part, but I mean, he has different thoughts on it than I do. But they think that Department of Energy should be Gil's reading of this and Gil's understanding of this, and yes, I'm going third person quite a bit, thinks the Department of Energy Environmental Management should use some of their budgetary dollars to go to Department of Transportation outside of their fences.
I see, okay.
And that's been my and a few other people on the board saying, hey, you want money for inside your fences, go and ask for it all day long. But if we start talking about outside the fences, we have Department of Transportation, we have Department of Homeland Security, we have all these other departments. Why should DOE? And there are some people that have that as a pet project. Some people, when I read this, I kind of felt like you. Of course, we all agree with safe shipping. I mean, yeah, great, yeah. That's kind of how I feel about this recommendation. It doesn't hurt anything, but it really doesn't accomplish anything either.
Yeah.
So that, going back, Doug was the one for all. I mean, one voice. Doug really he kept reining me in on stuff like that. He's like, Gil, one voice, and reminded me, and that's how I felt on this one. I was like, yeah, you're right. It doesn't hurt anything, but as you can tell, it's very Western states specific. And so there's a need in the Western states, they believe, for their infrastructure. And when I say their infrastructure, I don't mean inside their facility. I mean their infrastructure statewide. So that has something to do with this, in my opinion, to answer your question.
Look at you diplomatically doing that. All right. Any other questions or comments about this one?
Candace Cave, Cab. Could you elaborate on the last bullet point for this recommendation just a little?
Doug, can you? I really can't, but Doug may be able to, because they already have it.
Yeah, they do. As Gil just talked about, this is something repetitive. I mean, it's something that we're all doing, and we brought up those points in the meetings. But There was a letter, we sent a letter, I think, was it last year, to the EM1, and they prioritized some of the points we wanted to make sure that they didn't forget, or they don't forget. And part of this recommendation is doing just that. It's refocusing, bringing up those points, ensuring that DOE does not forget that these are the priorities. The biggie was the fact that we need to find a sanctuary, a final disposition place for all of the waste, and we need to do it safely. They just want to reiterate those points so that although we haven't had any major accidents with this, they want to make sure it doesn't happen. So it's just, I guess, a reiteration of what we are all here for, mainly.
Yeah, Doug, you mentioned that presentation, that video presentation. How many, like since '95, there's been 3 incidents.
Mm-hmm.
2 of them were fender benders, and one, there literally was kind of a scary one, where the containers rolled off a semi, but there wasn't anything bad happened, but it was scary.
Candace.
Okay, so Candace Cab, just to clarify, we're not asking for them to create a transportation program. We're asking for them to do what with the transportation program?
It does say create.
It does.
It does say create.
Because when I read it, it makes it sound like there is a deficiency somewhere and something needs to be created to ensure the safe and uneventful, whatever uneventful really means, shipment of the waste material.
Instead of you addressing that, would you like our DDFO who grab the
Yeah,
microphone?
let Amy, because I'll be mean.
Amy Boyette, Department of Energy. So I was in the discussion on this recommendation, and Doug and Gil are both being very polite, I'll say, in how this recommendation started out. There was one site in particular that is really looking for funding for the roads outside their site. It's that sort of thing, and it was that focused. And the reason it's so generally written now is because that was the only way they could get all the cab chairs around the table to accept this and say that, yes, they'd take it back to their board. In fact, the person who authored it, I think he said, this is my swan song, this is my last meeting. I'd really like to see this go through. So this is very vanilla, I'll say, and very general compared to how it started in that meeting. So it was rewritten, and so that's why it's kind of looks the way that it does. There was a lot of background and a lot of discussion on this one, and they couldn't come to agreement around the table, and so they really just made it this general thing that, like, you guys are having trouble even grasping what they're trying to get at. So. This
was the 3rd or 4th time they brought this recommendation to the board.
I will also say, just to tack onto this, and this is really just a general piece of information that is helpful to remember outside of this. It is okay to vote no. We do it so infrequently. We don't see a lot of no votes. Sometimes it's helpful to be reminded that it's okay that when we go to vote, to press the no button. You're under no obligation to support people. As Gil will tell you, he will disagree with some folks around the table all day long and twice on every Tuesday, but outside, you'll go have dinner, you'll have friends. You can maintain your professional relationships and still say no. Just one helpful reminder. Do whatever you want to. Any questions, comments, concerns on the transportation recommendation? Anything that you need clarified? Any other additional info that you need? Does everyone know how they're going to vote tomorrow on that?
No.
I know exactly how to take that. All right. So with that takes care of all of our major business. That's okay. Major business for the day. Next, sorry, I got a text message that was unrelated, but similar. That was oddly timed. Next is our public comment. I do have one person signed up for public comment, although we'll give the opportunity afterwards for any others who may have signed up. I'm going to start with you, Tom.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tom Clements. I'm the director of Savannah Riverside Watch. And I don't know a lot of you because I haven't been coming to the meetings lately, and I'll make a comment about that in a minute. But I started attending the CAB meetings about 30 years ago. So I've seen a lot happen over the last decade. I've attended quite a number of them, almost all of the large CAB meetings and many of the committee meetings, and made a lot of comments at them. So I want to make a comment about the stakeholder recommendation that you've raised and the issue of public participation in this process. But first, I want to mention the plutonium bomb plant proposed for Savannah Riverside. Some of you may have attended the forum that my organization, SRS Watch, had last week. I posted some recommendations that need to be done before NNSA moves forward with this. You can see them on srswatch.org. And although the bomb plant is not directly your issue, but there may, if it goes forward and it's not authorized or funded by Congress, and if there's a continuing resolution or a small armed services bill, it might not get authorized. But there may be waste streams that come over to the EM side, so just pay attention if there are toxic waste streams that get transferred to EM or plutonium streams, and there's a lot on srswatch.org about that. Now on the issue of this stakeholder recommendation that you have, and my count was there were only 3 members of the public today. There may have been 4. And that has been par for the course, unfortunately. But I would recommend, rather than getting into that recommendation, and there were a lot of good questions raised about it, I think this body needs to be reflective about how you do your outreach to the public. And I'll give you some examples from this meeting. Let me just raise these questions. Invitations are sent out in a general way to the public who may have attended in the past. And that's a good thing. But I think you need to personalize them to people that have participated locally. Does the CAB or DOE orally welcome people who come? I never get that. I didn't get that today. Before the meeting starts, if there's time. Is there a welcome after the meeting officially starts? I didn't hear it today. Is there encouragement for the public to participate other than this comment period? I didn't hear that. So I think you've got a long ways to go, in my opinion. The board is not anywhere near as vibrant as it was in the past. And that may be one reason that the number of board meetings are getting cut back. But I just would encourage you to reflect on how you're dealing with the public that might come to the meetings or that does come to the meetings. And I think I'll give you one suggestion. I don't know if they would do it, but some past CAB members occasionally are used to come to meetings. I would encourage you to ask them to give you some input about how things used to be run and how they participated and what ideas they might have for stimulating participation in these meetings rather than the whole EM and Aiken Augusta world out there. That's where I think you need to focus. And I don't know if the CAB members would come to a full meeting like this or come to committee meetings, but I think you could gather some information that might help you deal with the public in a better way. So that stakeholder recommendation tomorrow, I really don't see any worth in it. I don't think DOE is going to do that. It's reaching out to a huge universe. I don't know how it would help EM necessarily or the CAB. So I just recommend you focus on how you run your business and try to come up with some better ways to do outreach. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom. Would anyone else like to make a public comment? Yes, sir. Come on up.
Good afternoon, Charles Utley, and I would like to ditto on Tom's comments, and I would like to see if it's all possible for those of you who are in the immediate area, when we have community outreach, community meetings, would you consider bringing in your expertise to the community? Because that's what we want to know more about. And it's almost like your new members. I heard you say it's good if they can get the information earlier, they'll know how to respond to it. And I can tell you, I've been coming here quite a while. My hair was bright when I started, so you can figure out how long it's been. And I had a head full of it. But through the years, in order to receive the information, it's always been a time and an opportunity to come and receive it. But it would be good if we keep up with the local communities in the area to give them this feedback, to let them know what is going on with Marks or the old bomb plant, whatever you want to call it, and to make sure that the local individuals understand what you're talking about by transportation. I heard somebody say, oh, the acronyms. Yeah, you do need a dictionary of acronyms just to interpret what's being said at the board meetings. But we can resolve a lot of that type of information in a local city, where you and I can sit down together and talk about what it is that you perceive you want to talk about. Because even as an area representative, I've traveled the area quite a lot, but there's always something new that comes up. And I want to say to you, be open-minded, that they are not as smart as you are, but they are willing to learn if the opportunity presents itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Riley. All right, folks, that's the end of our agenda for the day. Gil, do you have any closing comments before we recess until tomorrow morning?
Just thank you to everyone for coming out today. Thank you for the committee updates. Thank you for the elections. Congratulations to those who were elected, or condolences, depending on which way you look at it. But other than that, I don't, except that we're here at
9 a.m. tomorrow.
9:15 tomorrow. 9 a.m. tomorrow. 9 a.m.
This is
9
why I
a.m.
have ulcers.
9 a.m. 9 a.m.
9
And I've
a.m.
traveled with you.
I know.
Yeah, so. But thank you all very much. See you tomorrow. Different bat time, but same bat channel.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.